Logan Carter gripped the steering wheel of his matte black Range Rover as he sped down the empty highway, the neon lights of the city fading in his rearview mirror. He wasn't sure where he was going, he just knew he had to get out. Away from the ruthless corporate world, away from the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him, away from the life that, despite all its luxury, felt entirely suffocating. The GPS sign blinked, signaling a turnoff toward a town he'd never heard of, Maplewood. Small, quiet, and completely off the radar. It was exactly what he needed. By the time he reached the town's main street, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the charming storefronts and brick-lined sidewalks. It was a world away from the penthouses and exclusive clubs he was used to. No paparazzi, no investors breathing down his neck, no reminders of the empire he'd built and the people who had turned against him. Logan pulled into the parking lot of a small diner, the only place that still had its lights on. He stepped out, stretching his tall frame, and ran a hand through his dark, tousled hair. The scent of freshly baked pies and coffee drifted toward him, and for the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. As soon as he pushed open the door, a bell jingled and a voice called out. "Take a seat wherever you like, I'll be right with you," a warm, feminine voice said. Logan slid into a booth in the corner, his sharp blue eyes scanning the diner. A few locals sat at the counter, chatting like they'd known each other forever. Then his gaze landed on her. She was moving behind the counter, pouring coffee with effortless grace. Dark brown hair fell in loose waves down her back, and her hazel eyes sparkled with a light he hadn't seen in a long time. There was something about her, something refreshingly real. A minute later, she was standing at his table, holding a notepad and offering him a polite, curious smile. "Haven't seen you around before," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Passing through," Logan hesitated. He wasn't ready to explain his past, not yet. "Something like that," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Well, welcome to Maplewood." "I'm Charlotte, but everyone calls me Charlie." Logan glanced at the name tag pinned to her apron. Charlie, it suited her. "What can I get you?" she asked, tapping her pen against the notepad. He realized he hadn't even looked at the menu. "What do you recommend?" Her lips curled into a small smile. "The apple pie is the best thing you'll ever taste." He found himself smirking. "That's a bold claim," Charlie shrugged playfully. "Only one way to find out. Then I'll take a slice and a coffee." She scribbled the order down and disappeared into the kitchen. Logan leaned back, exhaling. He had come here to escape, not to get caught up in small-town charm or the way a waitress with sharp wit and kind eyes made his pulse quicken. Minutes later, she returned, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, followed by a golden slice of pie. He took a bite and his brows lifted in surprise. "Okay," he admitted. "You weren't lying," Charlie laughed, leaning against the counter. "Told you." For the first time in a long while, Logan felt himself relax. The weight of the past still lingered, but in this quiet town, with this stranger who didn't know or care who he was, he felt something unexpected. Maybe running didn't have to mean being alone. Logan found himself returning to the diner the next morning, not entirely sure why. Maybe it was the coffee. Maybe it was the pie. Or maybe it was the way Charlie had looked at him, curious but not prying, kind but not overbearing. He pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell ringing out as he stepped inside. The morning crowd was light, just a handful of locals nursing their coffee and flipping through newspapers. Charlie was behind the counter, her back turned as she filled a fresh pot. She must have sensed his presence because she glanced over her shoulder, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Well, well," she teased. "Back for another slice of the best pie you've ever tasted," Logan smirked, sliding into the same booth as last night. "I'll admit it was good. But I'm here for coffee." Charlie grabbed a mug and walked over, placing it in front of him before pouring the steaming liquid. "Just coffee." "For now," she raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Let me guess you're staying in town for a bit." Logan hesitated. He hadn't planned on sticking around. He'd meant to drive until he found the next place, and then the next, until he figured out what to do about the mess he'd left behind. But something about Maplewood made it hard to leave. "Yeah," he said finally, "for a while." Charlie leaned on the counter, studying him. "You don't seem like the small-town type." "What type do I seem like?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "The kind who's used to expensive suits and private jets." "But also the kind who looks like he could use a break." Logan's smirk faltered. She wasn't wrong. "You always this good at reading people?" Charlie shrugged. "Comes with the job. You learn to tell when someone's running from something." Logan's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. He should have been annoyed that she saw through him so easily, but instead he felt something else. A strange sort of relief. He didn't have to answer, and Charlie didn't press. Instead, she changed the subject, launching into a light-hearted story about a customer who once tried to order sushi at the diner. Logan found himself chuckling, a rare thing these days. For the next few days, he kept coming back, in the mornings for coffee, in the evenings for dinner, and always he found himself talking to Charlie. She told him about growing up in Maplewood, about how she had dreams of leaving once, but had stayed to take care of her younger brother after their parents passed. She loved the town, but there was a wistfulness in her voice when she talked about the places she still wanted to see. And Logan, who never shared more than he had to, found himself telling her things he hadn't admitted to anyone. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough. Enough for her to see that he wasn't just some drifter passing through. One evening, as the diner quieted down, Charlie slid into the seat across from him, a cup of tea in her hands. "So," she said, resting her chin on her hand, "what does a guy like you do when he's not hiding out in small towns?" Logan smirked. "Who says I'm hiding?" Charlie gave him a knowing look. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I run a company, finance." Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't look overly surprised. "That explains the expensive watch." He glanced at his wrist, at the sleek, custom-made timepiece that stood out even in this laid-back town. Funny he hadn't thought about it much until now. Charlie sipped her tea. "So let me guess, you got tired of boardrooms and numbers?" "Something like that." She studied him for a long moment. "You don't have to tell me, you know." "Whatever it is you're running from." Logan met her gaze. There was no judgment there, no expectation, just quiet understanding. And for the first time in a long while, he considered staying. Not just for a few days, but for as long as it took to figure out why, when he was with Charlie, the weight on his chest didn't feel quite so heavy. The days in Maplewood stretched into weeks, and before Logan knew it, he had settled into a rhythm he hadn't realized he needed. Mornings at the diner with Charlie, afternoons spent wandering the quiet streets, evenings returning to his small rented cabin on the edge of town. It was a life so different from the one he had built, a life without constant phone calls, board meetings, and the ever-present pressure of being Logan Carter, billionaire CEO. Here, he was just a man who drank too much coffee and sat in the same corner booth every morning, listening to Charlie talk about her day. But reality had a way of creeping back in. Logan sat at the counter one evening, watching Charlie move through the diner with effortless ease. She tossed a playful remark to an elderly regular, laughed as she balanced a tray with one hand, and flashed him that smile that had become the highlight of his day. And then his phone buzzed. Logan hesitated before pulling it out of his pocket. He hadn't touched it in days, deliberately avoiding the outside world. But as soon as he saw the name on the screen, the illusion of peace shattered. Ethan Reynolds, his business partner, or more accurately, the man who had betrayed him. Logan clenched his jaw but answered. Carter, Ethan's voice came through, smooth and calculating. Took you long enough to pick up. What do you want? Logan's voice was cold. You can't seriously be thinking about walking away from all of this. Logan glanced around the diner, at Charlie laughing with a customer, at the warmth of the place that had somehow become his sanctuary. Maybe I am, Ethan scoffed. Come on, Logan, you built Carter Investments from the ground up. You're not the kind of man who disappears into a small town and plays at being normal. Logan's grip on the phone tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know you well enough to know you're running, and I also know the board is circling like vultures. If you don't come back and take control, you'll lose everything. Logan exhaled slowly. He had walked away because he had needed to, because the world he had built had nearly destroyed him. But could he really just let it all go? Think about it, Ethan continued, but don't take too long. The company won't wait forever. The call ended, leaving Logan staring at the phone in his hand. A shadow fell over him and he looked up to see Charlie watching him, her brow furrowed in concern. Bad news, she asked. He hesitated, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Just business. Charlie studied him for a moment before leaning against the counter. You know, for someone who claims to be taking a break, you look like a man who's about to go 10 rounds with his demons. Logan let out a humorless chuckle. Something like that. She tilted her head, eyes searching his. You don't have to tell me, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. And that was the problem. Charlie was here. And he was supposed to be gone soon. But the thought of leaving, of walking away from this from her felt impossible. That night, Logan lay awake in his cabin, staring at the ceiling. He should have been thinking about his company, about the empire he had built, and the battle he would have to fight to reclaim it. But all he could think about was Charlie. The way she made him feel like a different man, a better man, and the terrifying realization that he didn't want to lose her. The next morning, Logan found himself at the diner earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the quiet town. Charlie was behind the counter, wiping down tables before the morning rush. She looked up in surprise when he walked in. You're early. I wanted to talk, he said, his voice lower than usual. Charlie set down her cloth, giving him her full attention. Okay, Logan hesitated. He had spent his life making ruthless business decisions, negotiating billion-dollar deals without hesitation. But this was different. I have to go back, he admitted, to my company. Charlie's expression was unreadable, but he saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Something that made his chest tighten. I figured, she said after a moment, her voice quiet. Logan leaned against the counter, searching her face. I don't want to leave. Charlie let out a soft breath, giving him a small, sad smile. But you have to, he nodded. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then, before he could overthink it, Logan reached for her, his fingers brushing against hers on the counter. Come with me. Charlie's eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. Logan. I mean it, he said, his voice firm. Come with me to New York. She let out a soft, breathless laugh. You want me to drop everything and move to the city? Yes, Charlie studied him, her hazel eyes searching his. That's not fair, Logan, my life is here. I know, he admitted. But I also know that you once wanted more. You told me you wanted to see the world. She swallowed, looking down at their hands. And what happens when you get back to your life? When the board meetings and the pressure consume you again, Logan exhaled. I don't know. But I know that I don't want to go back to that life without you in it. Charlie was silent for a long moment, and Logan felt his pulse hammering against his ribs. Then finally, she pulled her hand away. I can't, she whispered. Disappointment crashed over him, sharp and unexpected. Charlie offered him a small, bittersweet smile. You're meant for that world, Logan, and I don't fit there. Logan wanted to argue, to tell her that she was wrong, that she fit everywhere he was. But he saw it in her eyes. She had already made up her mind, and just like that, the illusion of something lasting shattered. The next day, Logan left Maplewood. But as he drove away, the warmth of the town fading in his rearview mirror, one thought haunted him. He had spent his whole life chasing success, believing it was the only thing that mattered. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The city was exactly as Logan had left it: cold, relentless, and utterly consuming. The moment he stepped back into his office, the weight of his empire crashed down on him. Board meetings, damage control, and endless negotiations filled his days, while his nights were spent staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, replaying the moment Charlie had told him no. He had thought coming back would make things easier, that throwing himself into work would erase the gnawing ache in his chest. But nothing had changed except for the fact that now he knew what it felt like to want something more, to want her. Logan sat in his office late one evening, the lights of Manhattan stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. His assistant knocked once before stepping inside. "You have a visitor," she said hesitantly. Before he could ask who, the door opened wider, and there she was, Charlie. His breath caught as she stepped inside, looking completely out of place in her worn denim jacket and the uncertainty in her hazel eyes. But to him, she had never looked more perfect. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Charlie exhaled, her voice quiet but steady. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." Logan stood slowly, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. "Charlie," she shook her head, taking a step closer. "I told myself I belonged in Maplewood, that I wasn't meant for this world. But the truth is, I don't care about where I am as long as I'm with you." Logan closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face as he searched her eyes. "Are you sure?" Charlie let out a breathless laugh. "No, but I know that the only thing scarier than leaving was the thought of never seeing you again." Something inside Logan cracked wide open. Without another word, he kissed her. It wasn't a careful kiss. It was desperate, aching, the culmination of weeks spent pretending he could live without her. Charlie melted against him, her fingers tangling in his shirt as she kissed him back with just as much urgency. When they finally broke apart, Logan rested his forehead against hers. "You have no idea how much I wanted this." Charlie smiled, her hands still gripping his jacket. "I think I have some idea." Logan let out a shaky laugh before pulling her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he could. "I won't let you regret this." "I know," she murmured. And for the first time in weeks, Logan finally felt like he could breathe. The transition wasn't easy. Charlie wasn't used to the flashing cameras, the opulent parties, the high-stakes world that Logan moved through so effortlessly. But he was patient, guiding her through it, always keeping her close. And Charlie fierce. Stubborn Charlie refused to let the city change her. She still made him laugh when he least expected it, still challenged him in ways no one else dared. And when the pressure of his world threatened to pull him under, she was there, grounding him. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of his penthouse, Charlie looked out over the glittering city and then back at him. "I don't want to lose myself in all of this." Logan cupped her face, his gaze steady. "You won't, I won't let you." She searched his eyes before nodding as if she believed him. Months passed, and Logan found himself doing something he never thought possible, building a life that wasn't just about power and success. He woke up to Charlie stealing the covers, spent weekends taking her to the small cafes she loved, watched as she carved a place for herself in this city that had once felt so suffocating. And then, one night, as they walked through Central Park, Logan stopped in the middle of the path. Charlie glanced up at him, confused. "What?" He took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket. Charlie's eyes widened as he pulled out the small, velvet box. Logan dropped to one knee, his heart pounding. I never thought I'd find someone who made me want more than just success. Someone who made me realize that none of it means anything without them. Charlie's breath hitched. Logan swallowed, his voice raw. I love you, Charlie. More than I ever thought I could love anything, and I don't want a life where you're not in it. He flipped the box open, revealing a stunning ring, simple, elegant, perfect. Marry me? Charlie's lips parted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a moment she said nothing, just staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then slowly, a tearful laugh escaped her. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Logan smiled, his heart racing. Not when it comes to you. Charlie took a shaky breath before nodding, her smile breaking wide. Yes. The word was barely out of her mouth before Logan was on his feet, pulling her into his arms. She laughed against his lips as he kissed her, holding onto him as if she would never let go, and Logan knew, without a doubt, that this was the best decision he had ever made. The city had never felt like home, until now. The wedding was nothing like the lavish, high-society affairs Logan had attended throughout his life. It wasn't held in a grand ballroom or a five-star hotel. There were no exclusive guest lists, no media frenzy to capture every detail. Instead, it took place in the heart of Maplewood, in the backyard of the little inn where Charlie's best friend worked. Twinkling fairy lights were strung between the trees, casting a golden glow over the intimate gathering. It was simple. It was perfect. Logan stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, his sharp features softened by something rare, pure, unguarded happiness. He had spent years believing love was a distraction, an inconvenience that had no place in the life he had built. And yet here he was, waiting for the only woman who had ever made him question everything. Then he saw her. Charlie stepped through the small archway, her arm linked with her younger brother's. She wore a flowing white dress that hugged her figure before billowing out like something out of a dream. Her dark brown hair was pinned back, a few loose waves framing her face, and when she locked eyes with him, Logan felt something tighten in his chest. She was breathtaking. But more than that, she was his. As she walked toward him, Logan felt the weight of the past lift completely. The years of ruthless ambition, of sacrificing everything for success, of believing love wasn't meant for men like him, it all faded into insignificance. Because this moment, this woman, was the only thing that mattered. When she reached him, he took her hands, his grip firm, as if making sure she was real. The officiant spoke, but Logan barely heard the words. His entire focus was on Charlie, the way her hazel eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the slight tremble in her fingers, the way she smiled at him as if she had never been surer of anything in her life. And when it was time to speak, Logan's voice was steady, but thick with emotion. I spent my whole life chasing success, believing it would be enough, he admitted, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. But then I met you, and I realized that nothing I built, nothing I achieved, would ever mean anything if you weren't there to share it with me. You took a man who thought he had everything and showed him what it really means to have something worth holding on to. Charlie let out a shaky breath, squeezing his hands. I never thought I'd leave Maplewood, never thought I'd belong anywhere else. But then you walked into my diner and suddenly, staying felt like the hardest thing in the world. Because you weren't just passing through, Logan, you changed everything, you made me believe in more. Logan swallowed hard, his grip tightening. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. A slow grin spread across Logan's face. Finally, Charlie laughed, and then his lips were on hers, the world around them disappearing in a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. Applause erupted, but all Logan could feel was her warmth, her hands gripping his jacket, her heart beating against his. When they pulled away, Charlie was grinning, her eyes shining. "You did it! You survived a small-town wedding." Logan smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'd survive anything for you." The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and stolen kisses. Logan had never seen Charlie glow the way she did that night, surrounded by the people who had shaped her life, now sharing in this new chapter. Somewhere between the first dance and the cake cutting, she pulled him aside, her fingers lacing with his. "Come with me," she whispered. He followed her without hesitation, slipping away from the crowd. They walked past the twinkling lights, through the quiet streets of Maplewood, until they reached the diner, the place where it had all started. Charlie unlocked the door, leading him inside. The neon sign cast a soft glow over the empty space, making it feel almost surreal. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to come here one last time before we left." Logan watched her carefully. "Charlie," she exhaled, running a hand over the counter. "This place was my entire world for so long. It was safe. Familiar, but then you walked in and suddenly I wanted more." He stepped closer, cupping her face. "You don't have to give this up if you don't want to," she smiled, shaking her head. "I'm not giving it up. I'm choosing something else. I'm choosing you." Logan felt something deep inside him settle. He had spent his entire life making choices based on strategy, on logic. But Charlie, she was the one choice he had made purely with his heart. He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers. "I promise you, Charlie. No matter where we go, no matter what happens, you will never regret this." She smiled against his lips. "I already know that." And as he kissed her again, in the quiet of the diner where it had all begun, Logan knew without a doubt this was the only deal he had ever made that truly mattered.